Hi everyone, hope you're all well. I haven't made a video for a while because I have been getting my computer sorted out. Basically, yeah, this is the main one that I use, and it's just been slow. There's been space issues recently. The pixelation and the image quality is probably about the same, but hopefully the volume will be a little bit better. I've just checked it myself. It seems to be pretty audible, so hopefully that's enough. Um, Now, in the last week, there's been a number of things that I want to talk about, but obviously because of that, in that situation, I wasn't able to upload videos. So I'm kind of relying on notes as opposed to the source material that I had. So hopefully that will suffice. But it is the main key details. Um, I thought in 2025 that Just Stop Oil would no longer be in the news. I really thought by this point they will have fizzled away or become less prominent. One thing has changed, which is we're not seeing the daily sort of coverage that we saw around 2023, even early 2024. Extinction Rebellion, Insulate Britain, and then Just Stop Oil, they were making a lot of headlines. And there's that old mantra that all news is good news, even when it's bad news. And I think they took up that philosophy. They took the mentality that it doesn't matter if we're being attacked and we're being criticised, it's still attention. So that is one thing I think has changed. There'll still be a report when they pull off the stunts, but it's not sort of extensive and it isn't getting front page coverage anymore. I think that's a very good thing because I don't think these people deserve the oxygen of publicity. I really don't. I mean, I've made no secret of my contempt for what they do. Um, but I also feel it's very, very disingenuous for them to frame the pushback against them as somehow silencing their voices or not letting them have freedom of speech or punishing peaceful protest. That's another one they like to come up with, except that it isn't particularly peaceful protest. And I'll come into that in a minute, but it is an absolute disgraceful distortion to claim that these people being held criminally liable for their actions somehow amounts to political persecution. I think it is a dangerous distortion, and I think, frankly, it's insulting when you look at situations around the world which really are totalitarian states. To compare people being held to account for criminal actions, not opinions, criminal actions, as somehow being representative of political persecution is ridiculous. I may have mentioned this in a previous video, but I've just put it here for reference. I actually had a comment published in the I newspaper on January the 16th. It's just might be a bit hard to see on the screen, but that's my comment. Always nice to see, the Metro is probably the most circulated paper in the country, so it's nice to think that particular day, I would have had a big outreach. I'll just read it out, I'll just paraphrase it. Some of this was added by them because the Metro hadn't actually covered the story, so they're just putting it there for context. The second paragraph is Metro's own words. I'll just read it out. Just Stop Oil have hit a new low with the desecration of Charles Darwin's grave at Westminster Abbey on Monday. Members chalk sprayed 1.5 is dead in reference to the planet exceeding the safe 1.5 centigrade Celsius warming limit agreed by world leaders in 2015. JSO and similar groups have spent years aggravating the public with these stunts, but in terms of getting anything done, they have failed. Yes, they've got attention, but it's overwhelmingly negative attention. The issue is not about climate change denial, but about recognising that the actions of JSO do nothing to help the victims of wildfires in California, floods in Spain, or typhoons in the Philippines. Responsible environmental campaigners should distance themselves from these groups. I use slightly more colourful language. I think I wrote these obnoxious groups. But anyway, they published it, and I'm very pleased and grateful for that because you could just about see in the picture there. That's Charles Darwin's grave. That isn't a Shell refinery plant. It isn't some big carbon emitting company. That is the grave of one of our Great Britons. A grave. That is how low these people have stooped. And I think it is utterly contemptible. Utterly contemptible. I guess they targeted Darwin because he's associated with, you know, well, obviously he's known for his theories on evolution, but I don't know. I don't know what goes on in the head of these people. I guess they targeted him for the same reason as targeted to David Attenborough, because he's a symbol of, man's association with the planet. I don't know. I can't, and frankly, I'm not interested in knowing. I'm beyond the point of caring what they have to say, because I firmly believe that you cannot reason with zealots, you cannot reason with extremists. And the reason I say that, and the reason I call them extremists, is because if you try to talk to these people, if you try to have any dialogue with them about their tactics, they will immediately change the subject. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to take any responsibility. And they will say, we're happy to go to prison, so we are. But if you try talking to them about their tactics, they don't say this is practical, this is why we're doing this. They will say, but the planet, the planet. They're literally hiding behind the planet. I mean, and I've made this point before, if your fundamental argument is literally the planet itself, then it gives them a hell of a lot of confidence. I mean, honestly, you'd have to have a lot of confidence to go out there and aggravate the public to the extent that they do. I mean, I'll give them this, they've got tough skin. I mean, they must know that they're held in contempt by many people. But they seem to get a perverse kick out of it. Excuse me, I have a slight cold. Yeah, they just seem to almost enjoy being reviled. It's almost like, and I think there's a reason for this. I think they honestly see themselves in the same vein as suffragettes, civil rights activists, and other campaigners throughout history. On the point about the suffragettes, I'll just mention this briefly. That in itself is problematic because women in this country got full suffrage in the year 1928. They got partial suffrage, that is, women over the age of 30, in 1918, with the Representation of People Act, I believe it was. Now, the peak of suffragette activity was the year 1913. That is the wave of bombings and saboteur incidents. 1913. Now, I think it's become kind of a popular thing these days to say, well, the suffragettes engaged in terrorist action and it proves it works because women got the vote. I think that's lazy thinking, and I'm not sure that I think there were other factors involved, not least World War One and the changing labour market. Also, the tireless work of non-militant suffragists like Millicent Fawcett. I honestly think it's time that they got more recognition in their role for getting women suffrage. Now, in that campaign, it was about fundamental human rights. It was about basic equality for women. But the difference was, even with the suffragettes, they were massively unpopular at the time, but even they got more sympathy after the death of Emily Davison. In 5 years of this activity, there's been no change in public opinion. Just Stop Oil and their equivalent groups are just as unpopular as they ever were. So that's a difference. And as for the civil rights movement, that's just insulting. They will say they're doing this for future generations, but I strongly, strongly believe if you polarize the public, if you turn the public against you, you're going to fail. I'm reading Nelson Mandela's Long Walk to Freedom, and he has an interesting reference point regarding the civil disobedience movement in the 1950s. Mandela, of course, is associated with civil disobedience and, yes, later violence. But an interesting thing is Mandela said there had to be a pragmatism involved in this. There had to be an outcome involved in this. And again, this is a fundamentally different way of thinking. With Just Stop Oil, it's just mindless saboteur activity. There is no end goal to this. It seems to me that their only goal is pissing off the public and getting bad news from themselves. It's not like they're vandalizing paintings and thinking, okay, this will force the government to act. With this in mind, they've recently appealed. There's finally been some stiff sentences. In fact, it's amounted to some 41 years custodial sentence for 16 activists, and I'm going to break this down a little bit. This involved some hardcore activists such as Phoebe Plummer. She got 2 years and 2 months. Anna Holland, 20 months. These are custodial sentences. Now, it's important to note that Phoebe Plummer, particularly, is one of the most notorious saboteurs. I'm not calling them protesters, they're saboteurs. She is a prolific offender. She's only 21, 22, and she's already notched up a long criminal record. This is someone who has no remorse. Now, the key thing about leniency in a criminal case is if the offender has remorse. In the case of these activists, they have no remorse. Specifically with the Phoebe Plummer Anna Holland incident, that was when they targeted Van Gogh's sunflowers. But the other activists, the other saboteurs, have been charged with stopping traffic, blocking an oil facility, attending a Zoom call to discuss disruption, and I think it also included that motorway incident where they climbed the scaffolding, the notice boards above the I think it was the M25, endangering their own lives, but also endangering the lives of emergency services. When you look at that, how that can be called peaceful protest, I do not know. I mean, they use this term thick and fast. You know, they throw it around, they say we're peaceful, and the guys for doing that is because they're not throwing Molotov cocktails and they're not technically rioting. But I would argue that by deliberately seeking to cause stress to the public, that is a hostile act. It's not a peaceful act. It's high time we stop calling them peaceful protesters. Now, Friends of the Earth and Greenpeace have jumped on top of this, and they've come out and said that they're political prisoners and they're acting in self-defense to protect the families and communities. That gives me a good reason to never support, at least not anytime soon, Friends of the Earth or Greenpeace. Greenpeace is it's a lot older than these groups, but they're kind of the godmother, the godfather of green anarchistic behaviour. I mean, they're just, I just think they have a contempt for the majority. They have the audacity to talk about stifling democracy. They're the ones stifling democracy. They're the ones violating the rights of the majority by thinking that they can mess with people's lives. Now, I said earlier in the video, I think it was this video, I had to upload it again, but you cannot reason with zealots, because if you try talking to these people about, you could say to them, this is the thing that really, the point I would underline would just stop all. You could say, look, I agree with you, I agree we need to do something about the planet, we need to reduce carbon emissions, but your tactics aren't working. They won't listen. They won't listen. Back in 2019, someone that I knew who was in Extinction Rebellion, she tried to get me to join, and I said, look, I don't agree with the tactics. And her response was, yes, we need people like you to, you know, she was trying to get me in, and her attitude was, we need people like you to kind of steer us in the right direction. But I followed. I mean, I'm no longer socially connected, but I've seen what's happened subsequently. Her and her husband have been arrested. They've really become radicalized by this, and it's sad to see. Um, we're seeing young lives being ruined, effectively. They're being brainwashed by this narrative that we're all going to die in a few years. It's pretty dangerous. I think it's radicalization, just like any other form of extreme ideology, far right extremism, Islamist extremism. The violence may not be the same. In fact, there isn't violence, but I don't think it's peaceful. Um, so I really, really hope that they lose this appeal. They've appealed to the Court of Appeal. I think it should be rejected, because this is not a case of being unduly harsh. In fact, for too long, the anger that the public very much voiced was that the penalties were far too lenient. They got a tap on the wrist. And this is prolific offenders, just people who are doing it over and over and over again, who literally, that guy, Edward Whittingham, I think he was called, he actually had a crowdfunder encouraging the public or his supporters to fund him for future disruption, to literally fund his criminal activity. I mean, what is contemptible about this is these people are engaging in criminal activity, vandalism, trespassing. Those are criminal actions, and they're hiding behind protest. I mean, put it this way, if you had some random football hooligan who vandalised a lamppost, people would say, yeah, he should be charged with that. This lot are yobs in a different light. They're not. They're just they're engaging in criminal activity. And in a fair society, the epitome of democracy is that we should all be equal under the law. Now, the sheer arrogance of these people, this is what infuriates me about the attitude of Friends of the Earth and Greenpeace. They seem to think that simply because they're hiding behind the planet, they have a green light to do as they please. That's what this comes down to, an extremely entitled mindset. Well, I'm doing it for the planet, so I should be allowed to simply continue doing it. I mean, if you look at the attitude of Friends of the Earth and Greenpeace, that's effectively what they're saying. They're protesting, so they should just be allowed to do it. They should be allowed to sabotage motorways. They should be allowed to hurt the public. I think that is a contemptible, antisocial mentality to have. The vast majority of the public do not support them. It's torn between people who have outright contempt for them because they've personally been affected by their activity, people who are indifferent, don't care what they're doing, or people who kind of support some of their ideas but recognise that their activity is utterly polarising. Chris Packham, the former wildlife presenter, I think he's fully on top of this. This is a guy who has advocated the harassment of MPs outside their own homes. Now, bear in mind, we have had violence against MPs in recent years. We've had MPs murdered. Chris Packham has advocated that there should be no limits on protests, that people should be allowed to go outside the homes of MPs and effectively harass them. Shame on you, Chris Packham. And this hypocrite has himself had, his property, I understand, has been targeted by the Hunt lobby. There's been some, I don't know all the details of that, but absolute hypocrisy. So he's saying it's okay for him to be involved in these sort of stunts, but if it turns on him, he'll get the police involved. Absolute hypocrite. But there is a basic mentality that you see with these saboteurs. It's this extremely entitled mentality. We're allowed to break the law. I would say with any sort of protest, with any sort of movement, and I've said this even with movements that I support, for example, the protests in Hong Kong in 2019, 2020, I strongly supported that because, these people obviously don't want to live under Chinese communist totalitarianism. But there were some things going on there that were stupid. Blocking railways, vandalism, that wasn't particularly helping their cause, and it only solidified the CCP's claims against them. I think any movement, I don't care what the cause is, any movement has to get the public on side. If you turn against the public, and I'm not just talking about popularity contests, I'm talking about if you go out of your way to aggravate the public, do not talk to me about democracy. Do not tell me that you're doing it for democracy. If you have a contempt for the majority, if you have a contempt for people's right to go about the business, to go to work, to meet family, to do necessary things, go to funerals, go to weddings, if you are deliberately standing in the way of others, you're violating their human rights, actually. So I really, really hope the Court of Appeal rejects these overtures to get a reduced sentence, because that would send out the message that it's okay, they can have a green light to do it. That would be wholly the wrong message. So I hope it's rejected. I hope the original sentences are upheld. I mean, it's a disgrace that the police initially, their response was to hand out cups of tea, British Transport Police. They toughened later on, they got a bit more proactive, but not wonderful. I mean, this is why people have lost faith in the police. Shopkeepers have to put up with thieves going into the shops, yet they see the police literally walking along slowly with Just Stop Oil saboteurs, activists. It's infuriating. Yeah, and then you get other police who have actually taken action to their credit, but um, the point I would make about this, why they shouldn't get a reduced sentence, they've shown no remorse, they've targeted the public, they've hurt the public, um, and if they are shown mercy, if they are shown leniency, it will send out a green light that as long as you hide behind the planet, you can do whatever you want. You can vandalise graves, you can interfere with traffic, you can mess with people's lives. It's absolutely sociopathic, it's contemptible. Absolutely contemptible. So the sentences should be upheld. They shouldn't get a single less day than they've got. I hope the Court of Appeal shows some common sense in this case and considers the rights of the majority, which Just Stop Oil shamefully continue to violate with their brainless activity. And my message to Just Stop Oil: you have utterly, utterly failed. Wake up, get a reality check. These tactics do not work. They're getting attention. In fact, they're not even getting the same attention that they did before. When you pull off these stunts, there'll be some media coverage, but it's no longer headline news. You're not getting the covers of papers like you used to. You have failed. You failed miserably. You've infuriated the public. Stop. Just stop. No one's saying you no longer have to care about the planet. But the point I would make, and the point I made in my comment to the Metro, was responsible environmentalists will actually do things that are practical. They will support green business. They will look at sustainable solutions. They'll try to get the public on board. Just Stop Oil has done none of these things. And also, if you actually take their argument, it's extreme. They would bring this country back to the Stone Age. They want us to stop basically all sense of modern living. They would have all electricity cut off. If you really get into this, that's what they're aiming to do. They're zealots. And there's absolutely no way as a nation we should pander to them. If the government does stop future oil licenses and so on, I really, really hope it won't be on the premise of caving in to these zealots. And I think it would be right for the Tories reform to hammer them on that, to question Starmer, are you caving in to Just Stop Oil? To question Ed Miliband on that. We do have responsibilities to the planet, but frankly, the carbon emissions that this country puts out is minuscule compared to countries like China, India, the United States. Anyway, with that being said, I'll wrap this up. I really hope that the sentences are upheld. These people shouldn't get leniency. They have shown a contempt for the majority. It's just wrong. They have failed. And what they're doing is criminal activity. It's not legitimate protest.